Harlem Race Riot, March 19, 1935, 2:30 p.m. 16-year-old Puerto Rican Lino Rivera steals a 10-cent penknife from a local convenience store. An employee catches a young boy attempting to shoplift. The employee proceeds to lead Rivera into the basement and reportedly attacks him. The female employee accuses Rivera to have bitten her hand. Police were called to the incident, later releasing the suspect. An ambulance crew was able to confirm her bite on her hand, validating her story. Rumors of Rivera's death began to spread, eventually leading to an outbreak amongst the crowd that had gathered around. A rock was thrown into the window of the convenience store, leading to an abundance of looting seen throughout the city. In the aftermath of the rioting, 3 people were killed, 60 injured, and 75 were arrested. The riot ended the preceding day with an announcement by the mayor that everything was under control. The riot had dispersed. Detroit Race Riot, summer of 1967. Detroit, Michigan had been experiencing a heat wave, increasing tensions across the entire city. In June, a white police force was cruising through an African American neighborhood looking for people to arrest when they stumbled upon a party being held in the Economy Printing Building. The police then arrested all the people at the party and called local precincts to send cars to transport the mass of people to jail. An angry witness in the crowd threw a bottle into the air, which eventually crashed through the windshield of a police cruiser. This sparked the violence of the crowd, who then proceeded down the 12th Street, otherwise known as the Jewish Street, in Detroit. Buildings were burned down, others recklessly damaged in their wake, and multiple stores were looted in the process. The local police force was ordered not to shoot, leading them to set up barriers. Governor George Romney requested troops, but President Johnson was hesitant to send troops. He eventually sent them, but ordered them to stay on Detroit fairgrounds for 12 hours, hoping for the riot to end. Snipers were eventually sent in as the riot turned more violent. 43 people were killed, and 80% of people arrested during those few days were African American. Later, Johnson was accused for raiding to send the troops, and it became apparent that he had previously sent troops at the request of Democratic governors of both New Jersey and California. Johnson was Democratic, and Governor Romney was Republican. Detroit suffered from thousands of dollars in property damage, not to mention the loss of 43 citizens, including police officers. Word of the Detroit riot shocked the world. Detroit was the only state to have 2 African American Congress members and housed the largest chapter of the NAACP with over 18,000 members. Ferguson, Missouri, 2014. Teenager Michael Brown is shot and killed while returning home from allegedly robbing a convenience store. The grand jury was eventually called in for this case after rioting and violent protests began throughout the suburb of St. Louis. At the end of the trial, the grand jury concurred that there would be no indictment for the officer who shot Brown. Even with President Obama calling for people to peacefully accept the decision, around 100 buildings and cars were burned down, and around 60 people were arrested on various accounts. Since the protests, several police officers and Department of Justice employees have been fired, shot, or resigned from their jobs. Due to the fact of Ferguson being a suburb of one of the most segregated metropolitan areas, the social institutions surrounding Ferguson did not make sense to the rioters. Out of the 7 school board members, 6 were white and 1 was Hispanic. Only 3 out of the 53 members of the police force was African American. The community had a history of discrimination against African Americans, which led citizens to question whether or not the riot was handled properly. Baltimore, Maryland, spring 2015. African American Freddie Gray was taken into police custody and suffered from a spinal injury that resulted in his death a week later. Reports show that the transportation van made several stops while Freddie was in custody, delaying his opportunity for medical assistance. Local high school students began rioting for Freddie's death. A local CVS pharmacy was lit on fire, and it was later discovered that protesters cut holes into the hose. After several more violent protests, the National Guard was called into the scene and a state of emergency was issued, also creating a citywide curfew. The officers involved in Gray's arrest are now being faced with charges. What have these pictures shown you? Police brutality. The images depicted the harsh conditions exhibited by both the police force and rioters. All of these events have sparked media coverage of police brutality, often giving off an impression of the police force being more brutal than helpful. But do you notice anything else? Mobs of angry protesters, often becoming violent, more often than peacefully protesting. The rioters get angry and tend to throw glass bottles and other sharp objects at the police forces, sparking police brutality. We haven't seen the inspiring pictures from these events. The men standing in front of the police force, the men picking up the thrown bottles, and even the little boy handing water bottles to the police officers in line. What exactly does this mean? Our opinion is influenced by what the media shows. The initial photos displayed the destructiveness of these events. Add in the police brutality images, and suddenly the situation seems a lot worse than it actually is. However, on the opposite side, if you just see the inspiring pictures, you may be fed with false hope. The media coverage of controversial events has a significant impact on the viewer's experience of said events.